Hi, Alex. Nice to have you here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Alexander Lane. I'm the author of the Nightmare Vacations novels. That's Blood Point and Blood River, which are stories about people who go on holiday and then it goes horribly wrong.
What drew you to writing about Irish folklore in particular?
I think one of the things about Irish folklore is that it's much deeper than British folklore in the UK. We've had so many waves of Romans and Anglo-Saxons and Normans all bringing their own cultures and religions with them, that the really deep original folklore of Britain is sort of buried in there and rewritten so many times. But with Irish folklore, there were waves of migration, obviously. I think you're kind of getting in touch with something kind of ancient and primal. And that's really revealed in the stories about the Tuatha De Danann and the She, who were probably the original hunter-gatherer culture of Ireland, and how they were replaced or tricked into the underworld by modern men when they arrived, as who were the first farming culture. And so I find that really interesting. And I wanted to capture some of that ancient oral history that's preserved in the Irish folklore. These fairies, they're not the cheeky little spirits that they've become in modern folklore. They were a really powerful race and they're kind of alien and scary. And they sometimes do nice things and they sometimes do bad things. Also didn't want to be too bound by that because I didn't want to just retell stories. The Banshee, which literally means female fairy, in modern folklore, she's just kind of reduced to this wailing harbinger of death in a major family. I wanted Norig to have agency and a desire for vengeance kind of that's deep in her blood, and a desperation from the millennia of imprisonment that she's suffered and the injustices that she's suffered. So that's really, how I, wanted to involve folklore in the story.
So I'm from Cornwall, and you're talking about fairies, but fairies, not the little fairy dust versions. We have the same. So we have like Cornish piskies, which we're not messing with them. Same as not breaking in fairy circles and things like this. People joke about it, but no, we don't actually do it.
That's one of the things that I was really conscious of, was that you'll speak to people today and they won't want to go into fairy circles. Those traditions are still quite alive. Yeah, these stories still kind of live on in the culture. There's an amazing resource that I was told about called Dukas.ie. Going back to just after Irish independence in I think the 30s, they made this real effort to get school kids a lot of the time to talk to older people in their communities and capture all the folk tales. Some of it was memories about real history particularly from the famine era that they didn't want to lose. But some of it was just, little beliefs about, blessed springs or pukas that would trick you if you went down a particular road at night, like that. And they recorded all this, and then it's all been digitized. So you can literally put in like a village name and it will tell you kind of what stories are available to read from that area. And either you can like read the digitized version or you can see the original pages. You can put in Banshee or name from Irish folklore and it'll come in with stories and tell you, where those stories are told.
So the novel builds tension, obviously, through this eerie folklore and the psychological horror. Were there any plot twists that surprised you even while you were writing?
Yeah, quite a few. Sometimes it surprises me about how far I'm willing to go. And I do sometimes dial it back. Like, I don't like sexual violence because I think it's quite gratuitous and it's a real cliche. But the whole thing with the pine cone, don't want to give too many spoilers away. I can't really think from where it came. Wanted a kind of a way to gag the Banshee and what would be available to do that. This idea popped into my head. And I think I lead into that rather than dialing it back at all. And then I really had to consider the consequences later on for what that would mean for Holly and what a horrific mistake it is for her dad to allow Black Thomas to do what he thinks is necessary. And he was a character, who kind of, he's not a nice person at all. He was a horrible person in real life. He was called Black Thomas because of the way he treated his tenants during the famine, bulldozing houses in Kinnity and stuff like that. He's not a nice person at all. But it turned out he was quite fun to write because he's the character who's convinced that he's doing the right thing. Becomes that mad uncle who just say what he's thinking. yeah, that was the whole thing that kind of took me by surprise. But sometimes it's nice to lean into that and just see where it takes you.
Yeah, your mention of that, the real history that you looked into, finding out that the pyramid is real and all the names are real, and I was like, oh my God, I'm in a rabbit hole now.
The pyramid is a really good example of
Mm.
an insane inspiration. It is, as you say, a real object. And yeah, I had quite a trip down a rabbit hole there, discovering that there was a whole fad for about 200 years in the 18th and 19th centuries of building pyramids all over UK and Ireland. It was a real kind of, upper class, I'll build myself a folly, and the obsession with kind of Egyptian influences at the time. So that was a lot of fun and that. But again, that was kind of a thing where it became a launching point for the imagination, because I couldn't work out why all these certain people were in the pyramid. There didn't really seem to be a satisfying explanation for exactly who in the family was even responsible for it, because none of the timelines quite added up, and it all seemed very speculative. So I felt that there was a lot of freedom for me to write a story that wouldn't tread on any toes of any deeply held historical beliefs.
So, how did you develop the ideas for the characters to tell their stories both through the diary entries and the video logs?
Yeah, so I initially came to this format when I wrote my first Nightmare Vacations novel, The River, which is set in the jungles in Borneo. I thought I'd try this format. I was really surprised by how well it came out. And so when I did the second Nightmare Vacations novel, I thought, yeah, I'll run with that again. I'll kind of have the same guy do the outside narration that frames the story. Initially, I was going to try it with written diaries, and I realized that video diaries would make a lot more sense for the way the story was told. And also, it gives you that bit of freedom where you can go, oh, we'll have a bit of a social media here or a security camera. It works quite well, I think, with the way contemporary media is constructed. We don't just live in a world that's written diaries or TV or telephone calls. We do have a lot of different types of media in our lives. Yeah, hopefully it feels quite contemporary, even though like epistolary novels are quite old-fashioned.
Is it Blair Witch inspired? It feels horror filmy. It's in a great way.
Yeah, absolutely. Things like Blair Witch and Wreck and things like that from that sort of 90s era definitely have to be influences. And why not? They're really, Blair Witch films are really successful, pieces of horror filmmaking. Some people have mentioned House of Leaves. I hadn't read it at the time, have read it now. And that's a really extreme example of how far you can go. More, it's as much an art project as it is a book. But again, that does show how you can have a lot of fun with different forms of media and footnotes and things like that, and reveal a story in pieces, and really kind of make your reader work a bit and go back and go, oh yeah, maybe that thing was going on that I didn't realize at the time, that it would all fit in together. And bringing in historical accounts at the same time as contemporary accounts can be a lot of fun, and it can really add depth to the story. Definitely the goal is to have that sort of sense of things coming together, especially if it's a reveal that's about the horror and about, and can change the perspective of the story. That's something I'm definitely aiming for. And I don't, it's great to know if I achieve it, but because it's a really difficult thing when you're writing to know exactly if you achieve the effect that you wanted to when you set out.
How do you approach writing dialogue with different accents?
Yeah, Irish in particular is, I think, a real minefield as a British author, because we, as a culture, sometimes have a really patronising attitude towards Irish accents, and there's that horrible cliche and the Irish accent that nobody in Ireland wants to hear. So I was very cautious early on, but I was living in Ireland, surrounded by Irish people, and my partner's Irish. And also Irish English, one of the things that I started to realise, that it's the Irish language, but with British language forced down on top of it. The English sought to erase the Irish language, but Irish is a fairly ancient language that isn't structured in the same way as English. It doesn't draw on Romance languages. So it has its own peculiar rhythms and form. And that's why English people think that it sounds so lyrical and quirky because things that literally are said in a different order are coming out in English. And also, it's a very local language because even today, Irish people can often tell where you come from by your accent in Ireland, down to which end of the village sometimes.
Yeah.
And again, so I'm quite lucky to be there and learning all of these things about a culture that I didn't really know very much about when I went there. And so I just tried to pay attention and use my partner to sense check my writing and make suggestions and just get it right by redrafting and keeping going and until it was something that I was comfortable with. So it's really nice to hear that you and other reviewers have been so complimentary about that part of it and how immersive it feels.
Yeah, I think probably the thing with writing dialects and accents is if you don't notice, then it's gone well. And then last little one, this could go any direction. Do you have a favorite book or TV show or film that was focused and on any of these topics really? So witches, banshees, any of the good folklore stuff, any of the spooky stuff.
Yeah, I was trying to think. I couldn't really think of any particular TV shows or films about witches. Maybe a bit of Buffy, I don't know. But yes, in terms of like how the character of the witches and where they fit into society, I think maybe something like Terry Pratchett's Granny Weatherwax. That sense of how they serve the community, and they're very much part of the common folk, but they're still people to be feared and respected. They are powerful, and they're also this kind of bulwark between the human world and the other world. And so, yeah, that's where I put Cara and Evie and the role of the witches. And I think that's quite good. It quite works quite well in the sense that then that has been lost. That's something that's kind of disappeared, and that Cora has to kind of rediscover her place and her role as a witch.
Yeah, I think the history of witchcraft obviously, so deep, so profound, goes so far back. But I think Cora really encapsulates it well, that kind of the attempt to push it aside, but she can't. It's not a choice. The grappling with who she is, which, everyone does, but to a different degree. And then again, as we've spoken about the different forms of media giving us different elements about the history, but her book, the book, is great. Why didn't my mum pass down a big old witchcraft book to me? The stories in the book, the stories in her history is in her. It's subtle. It's not black cats and brooms, but it's the witchcraft, isn't it? Which is a really, I think, difficult line to draw sometimes for a lot of media, whether it's TV or film or anything. I think, yeah, it's just that innate craft.
Cora's role and the book and the famine era story of the witches wasn't really there in the first draft of the story. And immediately when I read it through, and then I worked with a really good development editor who came to the same conclusion, I felt that there wasn't enough of that history. It was referred to, but it wasn't there in a strong enough form. So I wrote those passages in the second draft and gave Cora a much bigger role. And to be honest, I'm really glad I did. There was so much fun researching that story. Niall O'Cushane was an academic who I found at the University of Galway, who was really helpful, kind of the educational levels of women in Famine era Ireland. And that helped me again with the language thing. So I was able to read some texts and get an idea of how they might write. Yeah, so those characters really came alive and added a whole new dimension to the story that really gives it depth when in the present day, when you're seeing how Nori and Holly respond to each other and are affected by what's happened in the past. David Winpenny is the author of Up to a Point, the book about pyramids. Rachel McKenna, who is the senior executive architect at Offaly County Council and wrote a book about follies in Offaly, which has a huge section in it on Kennedy Castle. Yeah, and of course the National Electrical Museum, the best museum in Ireland.